So that's our ship. You notice it's, well, you can't really tell how big it is. It's about six decks, not counting the bridge. It holds 200 passengers, which is the recommended amount for traveling to Antarctica, because only 100 people are allowed on a landing place at a time. So if you're on a really big ship, it's going to be quite a complication to get people off. And I think a big ship doesn't even let people land. So I would recommend not doing anything bigger than 200, although there's some icebreaker ships which can go into the Weddell Sea. If you're looking for the emperor penguin, you need an icebreaker to safely get in there. So that being said, the talk is called the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean is anything kind of between South America and Antarctica. But first, this is a picture of the North America, South America, and it shows you kind of how we get down to Antarctica. Almost all the ships start with Ushuaia, and that's at the southern tip of Argentina. So we took a left turn at Santiago de Chile and went over to Buenos Aires, which was a wonderful 4-day trip. So if you're going to go all the way down there, you might as well do something else. There's Tierra del Fuego down at the tip. We wanted to just make sure we got there on time, so 4 days ought to do it. I also chose this screen because of the windy, and it shows all the wind. Before we left, the captain lectured us that maybe we would go a different circle because of the way the weather went. The seas can get pretty rough down there. This is a picture of Antarctica showing South America to the left. Most of the maps will do that because Greenwich, which is the 0 longitude, is straight above us. So that's due north. So that kind of takes a little getting used to. The right part of Antarctica is covered with about 1.75 miles of ice. And this already starts at an altitude of about 2,000 feet. So that's what people really worry about. If that melts, now you've got something that is entirely more dramatic than we can even imagine. So far, there's no evidence that it's melting, but I'm sure that depends on how much more the temperature goes up, because how much melts and how much freezes is what determines how much eventually everything melts. The squiggly line is really important. That's called the convergence, and that's where the southern waters, which is Antarctica-based wind and cold, meet the northern waters, the warmer waters. And so there's upwellings there. It brings up a lot of rich food. So whales and all kinds of mammals and fish come down here to fatten up. Whales don't live down here. They mate in warmer waters, but they come down here to eat. The other thing here is 0 over there on the left is where we left from. We went to the Falklands, South Georgia, and we didn't know we were going to the South Orkneys, but we left South Georgia a little early because of wind, and we did stop there. And then where most of the ships go, to the peninsula of Antarctica, was next. That's another picture. I'm just going to skip right over that. So here is our trip again. We've got South America, Falklands. We've got South Georgia. Then we went to the South Orkneys and back to the peninsula. This is Ushuaia, where we, oops. Don't know why it didn't go down. There's Ushuaia, where we left from. It's a small place. You can see some of Tierra del Fuego in the background, and we did have a chance to hike there got some beautiful pictures, but we're going to move right on. There's our cabin. It was pretty, and my wife there shooting out the window, pretty comfortable. Okay, our first stop was the Falklands. That's where the war was, and that's managed by Great Britain, just like they manage South Georgia. The Beagle Channel, through which Darwin would have sailed on his journeys. And then our first taste of the sea down there, the swells were 13 to 16 feet, which means they closed the top decks of the where you could eat, but there were two restaurants, one on the 5th deck and one on the 2nd. This was taken from about the 3rd deck out, so you can see that the waves are reaching up fairly high there. So we learned to walk in arcs. Nobody walks straight. The Falklands are twin islands. There are not a lot of people there. Over on the right side, about as far over east as you can get is Stanley. But there's only a few thousand people living there. There are farms all over this area. And the two landing places that we went there, Grave Cove and West Point Island, are shown. As you can see, that's on the kind of the northwest side, which shields you from the wind. So that's an advantage of stopping on that side. Here we are going ashore. Everybody, 10 people fit in a Zodiac. You took turns. Again, there could never be more than 100 people on the land at the same time. These were our first visitors to welcome us on the island. I think they're just actually going to get some food, but to us, it kind of looked like, there they are, there come the penguins. These are Gentoo penguins. You can tell them by the little white patch above the eye. They're the only one with that and over their head. They are not threatened. They're considered of least concern. They seem to be doing really well with climate change. They just move a little bit. There's a limit to how far they can move, though, because they have to get to the water and get food for each of those little chicks. You can see how they have little spaces here. Looks like these all have pretty much one chick in this picture, but some of them, they do have 2 eggs. I think I see an egg over underneath the right one. You can kind of tell how the weather is going to be. The Falklands really wasn't that cold. It was like 50 degrees. And so they need a place where there's no snow, and they can start mating here earlier. They generally come back to the same place where they started. The economy of the islands is sheep, shipping, tourism, and fishing. And when we say tourism, we mostly mean every ship like ours that stops there gives somebody some money. So that's really helpful to the local people. There's my wife and some people hiking up. Everybody got a free jacket, so we didn't have to bring anything. And the boots we gave back, but we got fitted the first day as we were on our way here for jackets and wellies. So we hiked a couple kilometers over to the other side after visiting the penguins on that first beach. And when we got to the other side, we found a beautiful colony, which is a mixed colony of dark or black-browed albatross and rockhopper penguins. And here you see the black-browed albatross with chick, and those nests are just an amazing piece of architecture. You see a little grass sticking out. Otherwise, they build these things and they come back to the same nest. I watched a BBC special, it was on recently, you may have seen it, where if the chick falls out of the nest, the albatross does not recognize the chick, which is kind of heartbreaking, and that chick has to climb back in. In the case of the BBC program, it fell out because of the wind, and the wind can get pretty strong. Just kind of fell right out. You see a couple of rockhoppers here. There's one on the right, one on the left between the two birds. They like this place because of protection. They get tortured by skuas, and that's not much fun for them. So, and the skuas will also kill their chicks and eat their eggs. So here they're kind of safe. This guy's celebrating his freedom, I think. Really cute to see the red eye. There's also a Macaroni penguin. This is a rockhopper, but the Macaronis also have the little feathers there. There's another picture. Their wingspan is 8 feet, so it's not like a pigeon size, even though it looks kind of small here. And you can really see the black brow there and the beak size. On the Falklands, there's a lot more animals and plants than you would see when we go further. Once we get past the 60th latitude, now you see, once you get past that, things get colder and not too many things grow and can live there. A couple birds that we saw. The only picture I did not take out of all these is the long-tailed meadowlark. I did take a picture of one, but it really wasn't any good. It was a little too far and he wouldn't turn around. So I just borrowed one. The thrush was posing in different places. This gives you another picture of the Falklands. It's a kind of a moorish, but those plants are really fine little petals. In some places, they were just covered with tiny little flowers. So it's kind of pretty. Our next stop was South Georgia. And if we hadn't told somebody, a friend of ours, that we were going to the Antarctic, we might not have gone to South Georgia because my wife was always afraid of the passage. There are horror stories, grand pianos falling over, windows breaking. It can be just amazingly rough in the passage between the southern tip of South America and the peninsula. But they said you've got to go there because of the king penguins. There's several 100,000 king penguins. I think we probably saw, if you count looking at tiny heads, about 400,000 king penguins. So another 1,963 miles we had to sail to get from the Falklands to South Georgia. And the swells were slightly larger, but we were getting used to them. My wife wore a patch and she didn't get sick at all, where she can get seasick just in a car. So we made 4 stops here. Grytviken was a whaling station, which you'll see in a couple minutes. Our first stop was Salisbury Plain, and we only got to see that from the zodiacs because the naturalists, they go out every day before we land and make sure it's safe. And they felt that the breakers here might tip over a zodiac, and the water's getting a little cold. You see there's a bit of snow down here. The temperature's now dropped above freezing, but not a whole lot. Now this one you get an idea of how many penguins can fit on a beach. All that little brown, that's not a mold, those are little heads. And the small ones are really a brownish color, so that lends a lot of the color, where the penguins are, once they get their feathers, they're white and black. The kings are beautiful birds. And I could have stayed on some of these places more than, we stayed each place about 3 hours. We would get off. Now this one we didn't get off, we just rode back and forth. You see fur seals mixed in with the penguins. They get along just fine, except once in a while. You see here the snow and ice in the back, and that's melted back. So this glacier is not making it to the water. Now we're just under that 60-degree latitude. We're just south of the convergence. So every summer, this is melting back more. And the peninsula is one area where, and that which holds for the west part of Antarctica, where maybe ice is going back. Fortuna Bay was our next stop. You see glacier, rocks. Here we did get off. This is just after stepping off the Zodiac. Now this is an interesting little fur seal. They're what's called leucistic, which just means they have less pigment. Nobody could confirm that they're more likely to get killed. These are the predators anyway, so I don't know what the survival rate of these guys are. There's a nursery. There's got to be a bull around. The bull can't eat until he's tired of defending his harem. And here we have a fur seal who was kind of welcoming us also. You can notice the fur there. 3 million of these exist in the world, and 95% of them breed right on South Georgia. So they may go a long way, but they end up right here. They're also not a big concern environmentally. The males are a lot larger than the females. And I start putting how far things can dive here, because these penguins and seals, they can dive pretty far. This guy can dive 593 feet. They don't necessarily do that all the time, but they've been measured to dive that deep. Here you've got, there's 2 million pairs of these guys, the king penguins. And they always measure penguins by pairs. So they don't say how many penguins there are, how many pairs of penguins. If it's not a pair, it's really not viable for the future. And they look for the same mate that they had the year before. So they show up at the same beach in the same place. In fact, if you're a naturalist and you want to study them, you can put a tracker on them, and you can put a GPS tracker on them. And when they come back the next year, you find them and you take the GPS tracker off and find out where the guy's been. Here's a trio that I had to photograph just because I like seeing neat groups of creatures, and the color and the feathers. You can see how tight those feathers are. Right now they're tight because these guys, I assume they've already molted because they look beautiful. There's my wife at St. Andrews Bay. We're standing on the back of the boat just before getting off to go ashore. Now here's our next stop. The wave here doesn't look too great, but we didn't have a problem. I think we landed a little bit further down the shore. On the way in, I got this picture. It's not a great picture. I wouldn't use it because it's not sharp as I would like. But there they were, the 2 giant petrels. Their wingspan's about 6.8 feet. And like a lot of creatures down here, they live pretty long life. You see birds up here, they probably don't live 26 plus years unless you're called a parrot. Now we see some elephant seals mixed in with the king penguins. I don't know if he's looking at me, but you kind of think he might be. You can see this beach, and it's also pretty crowded. You're not allowed to walk closer than 15 meters to the penguins, but they get closer whether you want to walk close to them or not. You can sit down and they'll come up and just look at you. And that's allowed, as long as you're not bothering them. I just like this picture with the 2 guys in the mountains in the background. It's just a beautiful place. Here's runoff from the glaciers. So you've got a lot of guys standing in the water. Obviously, they're not cold. And the peaks up to, well, I'll show you some at the end. That thing over on the right with the cloud on it, that's about 9,000 feet. Doesn't look like it, but this is kind of like Colorado. If you see the mountains in the distance, you can drive a long time before you actually get there. I wouldn't want to have to climb to the top of that very quickly. We looked at some really great feathers before. Now you can see molting. They molt in about 2 weeks, which some people consider that to be super fast. And I think that's because most birds molt over a year and they just lose things and they get them back. But these guys can't afford that. They can't go in the water while it's like that. And you see a whole pile of feathers over on the right side. Most of it blows away, but that kind of fell in a wet place, so I was able to photograph it. As I said on the thing there, they only come ashore to mate and to molt. And of course they have to raise their young. So that's a period here. The clouds down there were just kind of dreamlike. I asked one of the naturalists, how high is the atmosphere? And then I really had to look it up because I forgot. But on the South Pole, the troposphere is about 4 miles thick. And on the equator, it's about 12 miles thick. I never thought of that before. You look at a globe and you see, well, because of its spinning, it's always thicker around the equator. But it seems like this is much more exaggerated when you look at the atmosphere. So you really have to be careful with the sun. And this is where the ozone hole was some decades ago, which we've made progress with. It's still not closed, but at least we've stopped the degradation. Another cloud I liked, it kind of like a spaceship over the mountain. And then before we leave here, we got one more. I looked this up. These are 9,500 feet high. So that's our little Matterhorn there on South Georgia Island. This is the third place we stopped grit picking. We had one person on board who didn't want to stop here because she said this was too gruesome for her to even think about. When they start describing how many whales could be cut up and how fast it could happen, because she was here once before, she got sick. Those tanks are for blubber. I mean for whale oil, excuse me. They get the whale oil out, and there's other tanks as well as those. You see a bunch of small ones way over on the right. The whale oil was super important in the beginning. When they first started killing these, it became great for candles and all kinds of different products. And in the beginning, they didn't really use all of the whale. That took a while. You see one boat there called the Petri. So it's kind of like a petrel, excuse me. You can't really make out holes very well, but each of these ships had holes up here, and you would have maybe 6 whales tied on each side. They were looking for a whale called the right whale, which is called the right whale kind of from a human perspective because they said that's the right whale to hunt. It's so easy. You've got the gun up here, which that fired explosive shells, so it would penetrate the whale and then explode. And the crow's nest up here, so they could find them. Anybody, I don't know, anybody who's read History of Shackleton, this is where he was buried. He didn't die here, but when he was, this is where he made one of his most amazing adventures, where he saved everybody on his ship. He got back to this whaling place. This was after incredible hardships of getting his people to Elephant Island and then taking a small boat all the way to a far island like 600 miles away in a tiny little sail, and then walking in 36 hours over a mountain to get to the other side here. And then he had to borrow 3 boats to get back to his men and save them all. And this is where the story ended, because his wife, when they were going to send his body back, said, no, you got to bury him. You've got to bury them there. So the ship turned around and brought him back here. And that's where he's lain since 1922. So as we left South Georgia after a bit of time, probably a day later, we saw our first big iceberg, and this was it. I was just, it's a jaw-dropping thing to see something that's maybe 200 feet high. I was on deck 6 when I took the pictures, and I'm shooting straight out. This is a huge piece of ice. When the Weddell Sea collapsed, at least part C or D, I forgot which part now. It was as big as the state of Delaware, the piece of ice that floated off. And sometimes these things get stuck and they'll just stay somewhere. Nearby, there was a small little thing, and that's full of penguins. They're just out here happy as old clams because that's where they're eating. I got a little closer. This is zoomed. Those are Chinstrap penguins. So they would just get in the water, find some food, come back up. It's like us at the beach, except we don't eat when we get in the water. So the next stop was South Orkney. We left one day early because the weather looked a bit threatening, which meant bigger waves than we'd had before, and what we had was big enough. The first stop was Station Orcados, which is an Argentinian supposedly a science station. There are dozens and dozens of science stations in the Antarctic. There's 54 countries who have signed a treaty to say that they're not going to contest any land, even though many of the countries claimed land in the beginning. But this science station is more of a political thing than science. There's like 2 scientists, and mostly they're probably just soldiers who are holding the place. Nonetheless, it was still interesting to visit, and they were very welcoming. You see kind of the extent of the place. Every science station now built is built on stilts, but I don't think the stilts on this one really are hydraulic. The newest ones are hydraulic, so each year you can move them higher. They're on stilts for 2 reasons. One, it doesn't snow a lot in the Antarctic, so in volume it probably snows more in Albany, but it blows, and the wind just blows like crazy. So if you put this at land, for one thing, you can't open the door if the door goes out. So you're going to have to figure out how to get your door open. And the other thing, it just builds up wherever it is. The new US station at the South Pole and the one at McMurdo they're both on stilts, and some of them are built so they can drive or be hauled. Just behind the station in the little bay there, you can see a calving glacier. This is the natural process. At the South Pole, the glacier moves about 10 meters a year, so a little over 3 feet per meter. So it's like 30 feet. So there's this game that the scientists play when the South Pole. Once a year, somebody dashes out and moves the stick to mark the South Pole. Their station moves, but the stick, they don't want it to be in the wrong place. So eventually, after many years, would end up in the ocean on something like this. So they run and they put it where it belongs. This little Adelie penguin, which are pretty common, but we didn't see any groups of them, just sitting out there on one of the pieces of ice. Now it was on to the White Continent. For us, the peninsula. Antarctica is about the size of North America in width. And in the up and down, it's also about the size of our width. So 3,400 miles across and up and down. So the people who walked from the right, the east side, which would be, oops, not where I want to be, which would be down here, they walked all the way to the center, or they were on their sleds, or in some cases, having the sleds pulled by horses if you were one of the explorers. So we're right here, and that's where all the tourist ships go. You can get into here without being an icebreaker. There's a lot of ice that you got to miss, but at least it's reachable by a normal boat. If you go in here and you want to see the emperor penguins, which is now possible, this is an ice sheet. You need an icebreaker, and the emperor penguins are the ones who stay here all year, and those are the wonderful, amazing ones where the father holds the egg on its feet, pushed up against their brood, not pouch, but a little brood strip where there's no feathers, and keeps it all winter. This was Clarence Island, so it's not Elephant Island, which is where Shackleton landed, but it was kind of misty and kind of interesting to look over and see that on the side, this mysterious island off in the distance. stops were volcano. So here's Deception Island, and I don't know why they were disappointed, but that's the name it got. We're in a caldera that's collapsed. I climbed up on a promontory so I could get a nice shot. And you see how dark the rock is around there. It's pretty fine. And as I was getting back on the Zodiac, a woman said, "You got to put your hand down here and feel this." So she had dug out just like 4 inches of space into the sand. And I was kind of like, oh, what's so exciting about that? I need to get back on the boat. But she said, look, kind of command voice here. So I put my hand down and I was like, thank God I'm not a jerk. And I got back on the boat because it was hot. It was literally hot. It wasn't just like lukewarm. This was hot water. Not going to be any snow sitting right there. There's a couple of chin straps coming out of the water there. You can see what this volcanic soil looks like kind of up close. It's a piece of krill. This is the most important animal, modest as it is, in the southern oceans. Without this animal, there would be no penguins. It's the most abundant species on our planet. It says over there 500 million tons, 300 to 400 trillion individuals. And a whale will eat a ton of these every day, so, or a couple. They're about 2.5 average size inches long. This one looked to me a little longer, but I don't know why it was sitting there. I took something off of the web to see how this all works. So the phytoplankton feeds the krill, and then you see how the krill is just like the key animal for the entire ecosystem. Other than for the herbivorous zooplankton, everything eats the krill, and the whales certainly eat the krill. This was a leopard seal that we got told, don't get too close, don't get too close, but of course you want it your picture. Well, we weren't really that close. They get to be, for the females, they're bigger than the males, which is unusual in this kingdom. And these are the ones who are the bad guys. If you don't like to see seals thrown up in the air and chased around and eaten. When the little chicks come out for the first year, many of them are eaten. If they survive the first year, they're generally going to live 20 to 25. But that first swim, it's really dangerous, and that's what these guys are looking for. So they're all waiting. There's also orcas that come and look for them, and they kind of know when these chicks are going to hatch, more or less, and they just come wait. So it's quite I forgot the word for, you have to run some kind of a gauntlet. It's kind of a gauntlet. There's a picture on this island, even though this wasn't as big as the other one. These are all tanks that would hold the whale oil before getting shipped off. Now these kind of became artistic, and obviously they weren't crooked. Anything that's historic is allowed to exist on the Antarctic, and nobody's allowed to take anything, not even a rock. But if it's not historic, if it comes from us, it shouldn't be there. And so they're really careful. Before we could get off the boat in South Georgia, we had to have all of our pockets vacuumed. They had a person from South Georgia come on the ship and make sure we were okay. Every boot had to be looked at, the bottom of the boot. I had a couple tiny little rocks in the soles of my boot, and those had to be taken out with a little pocket knife. And that's just the way, that's how careful they are down there, that everything stays the way it's supposed to be. Between the next trip, I just threw in a picture where I managed to get a couple of albatrosses in the same picture. It's really hard to get these guys. They move, and you're kind of twisting your head around and almost falling over trying to photograph them when they're flying. So now we're leaving the Caldera. You see the front of our ship. There were a lot of more gentoos, you can see over on the left, and more elephant seals. There's a a little more of a close-up so you can see their personalities. They're really blubbery and slobbery, but very expressive. I don't know, maybe they look more like they're sleeping and it's just built into how their face looks, but they almost make you want to smile until you see something that's 8,000 pounds trotting along on their fins. They can go about 50 feet and then they just stop and go. In the water, they're dainty. So the females are double this. No, they're 1760, and the males are almost, what, 6 times heavier, 8,000 pounds. So 4 tons of beast there. Here we see just a little more of a Gentoo colony. More of a close-up. Now you see the 2. They always have 2 eggs, but one is ahead of the other one. One is bigger than the other one. The one most likely to survive is the first one that hatches. Normally, the second one doesn't make it, which is a sad thing, because they're also cute. Next, we went to Owen Harbour and Neko Harbour. This wasn't the farthest point, but it was in the middle of how far south we went. Now you see a different kind of a feel to it. You've passed a temperature line again. Now everything feels a little colder. See the blue color, the dark water. You see snow and ice on the side that's calving into the water. And then in the distance, a lot of ice and snow in the water. The salt water has to be 28 degrees before it's going to freeze. Here we were going ashore, you see snow right up to the rocks. We're still in the zodiac at this point. And here I would talk about the rocks, because the rocks are like gold or like glass beads, depending on whether you're trading with them or between them, amongst them. The rock is their currency. They each have their little place, because when there was snow here, you had to have some rocks. If the egg sits in the snow, it's going to get soft, and that would kill the chicken side. So they all build their little rock nests and sit on them and take turns feeding them and sitting on them. Here you see egg and chick. And this is the same species that we saw in the Falklands, not the Falklands, yeah, the Falklands, where the chicks were fairly large. So this is a couple days later, and these guys are just sitting on eggs as well. I think this guy might have been a little late. Here I climbed up a rock with quite a few other people, the ones that made it up there. It's kind of a long walk through snow, and every once in a while you break through and you're up to your knees in the snow. So it does get a little tiring. But you can see here some of the crevices as the snow is about to break off. We have some video that I'm still working on, a shortening of things falling into the water. And then the next one shows you again. So when the explorers were trying to get to the South Pole, they had to walk from their boats. They had to get onto the shore, and then they had to walk across all this land. They would choose to walk across the glacier because the option was the mountain. So how do you get out of this place? The glaciers all find the lowest places. That's the smoothest places, and otherwise there are mountains. So you're either walking in this super dangerous place where snow can fill in the cracks, and then you step in and you're all tied together. So most of the time they would get to pull somebody out. But this was quite a walk. On this place, you can see that the snow arrived and left. It hasn't even left yet, and they're raising their chicks. So they've got to walk a long way to get to the sea to get the food. So they're constantly on their penguin highways, going to the water, getting fish, coming back and feeding their kids or their chicks. Once in a while, you would try to walk across a path, and you're not supposed to walk on the penguin highway. You're not supposed to bother the penguins. But sometimes the penguins don't care what you're supposed to do, and they'll just get out of the path and walk, and you're like, okay, what do I do now? So you see people dumbly just standing somewhere. This is on the boat. Your captain has to be very alert. They don't allow anybody in the up in the control place, the bridge, sorry, because they need to focus. There was a captain on the same Ponant company that we were with a few years ago who hit an iceberg and ripped part of the ship. That's an expensive mistake, and he got fired. You see that most of the ice here is underwater, and this is something that's fallen in, so it's blue. Right behind it is the plain color of the stuff on the shore that either has fallen in or hasn't fallen in. I couldn't tell because I couldn't see it. Obviously, what's in the water had fallen. There you see a little Gentoo penguin. So when they swim like this. Every other stroke is out of the water. And they do that so that they can breathe when they're out of the water. It's kind of a nice show, but they don't do it for us. Here's an Antarctic shag or an Antarctic cormorant. The next picture shows its wings open. These guys can dive 372 feet. And that's not too bad for a bird. So you wouldn't expect its wings to be so big. Otherwise, how the heck would they swim? You can see there. But even with those wings, these guys can dive down a couple hundred feet to catch their fish. You see a little patch on the beak, kind of like almost like a little growth they have, and then a blue eye ring, kind of unusual. Our next stop through the Gerlache Strait, which we were in before, is to Port Charcot and Petermann Island. This was our southernmost point, so we just got down to the Arctic Circle. There's another kind of an example of you look for a place to land and how would you walk on there. So there's about 140 landing places on the peninsula and around. All the companies that take tour people down, they all work together. They're in an organization, International Arctic Tour Company organization. They have strict rules. They can ban boats that don't follow those rules, and they all know who's going to be where. So they keep track of, okay, I'm landing here. So they'll just organize it's like a big dance where everybody can go. We only saw a ship, a tourist ship once the whole time we were down there. It's not like a bunch of vultures and we're all trying to see something. We're really kind of like on our boat. So when we saw another boat, it was like, oh, there's a sister ship. And then we saw one really amazing sailing ship that was not sailing at the moment. It was on under motor power. Got to be some very wealthy people who could do that. Here we had land. You see in the foreground rocks. Where there's not ice, there's still rocks, and rocks in the background. So pretty rugged terrain. This was a promontory. It's probably about 20 feet out of the water. And we were standing far enough away that when we looked at this, I thought, well, those are a bunch of penguins. Even the birds look like the penguins. That's the cormorant, the tallest one there with its beak down. White front, black top looking, and then Adelie penguins all over the place with their little nests, and a couple gentoos thrown in. And somebody said, well, there are birds up there, and it took us a while to actually focus on them. When one flies, you know, well, that's not a penguin. This made a nice little drama. I took 6 pictures of this little drama, but only put one in here. We've got to keep this to a halfway reasonable amount of time. So I watched the guy steal 3 rocks from his friend over there. And on this one, the other bird finally realizes what's going on, that she's being robbed. And there's no police to call. So nobody's going to come and go, hey, you can't take her rocks. This is a law. If she doesn't peck him, he takes the rock. He didn't get this one. She finally put a stop to it. This is a snowy sheathbill. It's the only bird that lives all year round on the Antarctic. Population of 10,000 doesn't seem so amazingly big, but they're not too concerned about it. It's not my favorite bird. It's really kind of pretty, but it's another one that is a thief. So it's kind of like a frigate bird. You know, frigate birds, they just fly around stealing other birds' food. And that's partly what this guy does, although that red is seaweed. They're not killing anything right now. But they eat penguin and shag eggs and chicks. So you can't turn your back on these guys. Now we were navigating to Port Charcot. You see the water here is totally different, full of ice, icebergs, peaks and snow in the distance. Kind of like the prototypical of what do you think the Antarctic should look like? And when I look at the water here, I just think that water just looks almost heavy, like I'm about to skim. The penguin colony here is way up to the mountain, so these guys got a long way to go. It's like the people who moved to Oklahoma, I guess, when they have to farm on a piece of dried sod dust. And these guys had to pick a place where the ice stays just about all the time, and they live way up by the rocks. So it's quite a lot of work to up and down getting fish. We walked to another rock area up on top and we sat here about a half hour just looking and enjoying the day. The sun is actually pretty warming, so you can kind of get cold on one side and hot on the other. The reason the South Pole is so much colder than the North Pole is partly because of the altitude and partly because of the reflectivity of the snow. You've got a fairly thin atmosphere, white snow, and 2,000 feet elevation to start with, plus 2,000, another mile and 3/4 of ice. This is about the only crab-eater seal that we saw. They don't actually eat crab; they eat krill. So whoever named them, I don't know why they said crab-eater. Nobody knew. They can live up to 40 years though. Back in the strait, you see little ice things that the boat's driving around. He never hit one. He did stop a couple of times. So the next place we didn't actually stop. We just got out in the Zodiac. There were humpback whales pretty much all over the place. It was just your luck if your Zodiac happened to see more than another Zodiac. We talked to another couple who saw a pod of whales fishing where they dive down together in a circle, and then they come up and just open their mouth. Some animals use air bubbles. I don't know if that's the case with these guys. It probably is. And they push all the fish together and then they come up and eat just whatever they want. 35 tons for the female, 56 feet long. This guy looked pretty impressive. And one of I like this picture that I took. I've got different amounts of these, so I just put one tail. You've seen tails. What was so nice is when they go in, they're so graceful. They just kind of glide in. There's these monsters that move so slowly and beautifully with the tail just going in. It's like a dance. And maybe to see three go in at the same time. And you see all around this harbor, this ice is just ready to flow into the water and break off. One of the naturalists was like, whoa, I'm a little close here. Let me back up and try this again. The head must be under the boat, but he does seem to be looking back over his shoulder there. This is probably about the last picture of the slideshow. We drove around and looked at icebergs in the water and just kind of said goodbye to the Antarctic. This was a kind of a bittersweet boat ride, although the whales certainly made us thoroughly thankful that we were there and had done that. And then it was 2 days and 16 to 19 foot swells back to South America. So we didn't have bad seas. These were considered by the captain average, medium rough, not so bad. I just put my feet across a little wider when I would get into bed because you felt a little more stable that way. And then we were back, and Ushuaia gave us a rainbow and took a bunch of pictures of that. And then we were back, and we spent a couple of days in Buenos Aires again because my wife was afraid we'd be sick when we got back, or she would, and didn't want to then jump on a 15-hour flight back to Albany. So that's it.